Hello, and welcome to the weekly BB Bobcat Breakdown, where a couple of Texas State students dive into the details of Texas State athletic events that occur each week. With that in mind, the only way to listen is by learning, the only way to learn is by listening, and the only way to start is by starting, so let's get into it. My name is Luke Fox. I'm a Texas State sophomore. I'm majoring in electronic media.
Hello everyone, my name is Montserrat Luna. I am a Texas State senior and I'm also majoring in electronic media.
Hello, thanks for having me. My name is Kobe Arega. I'm a senior here at Texas State and I major in journalism.
Alright, with that, let's go into what we're going to be covering this week for this week's podcast. First off, we're going to go into the Texas State football loss to Coastal Carolina. After that, we're going to go into the Texas State men's basketball win over Miami and loss under Oklahoma. Then we're going to go into the Texas State women's basketball massive win over Bowling Green. And then finally, the Texas State volleyball win in their second game against Coastal Carolina. So let's get into this first game. Alright, Texas State football. Texas State versus Coastal Carolina. This occurred November 11th and was an away game. The final score being 23, to 31. It was a Texas State loss. An unfortunate loss right after Texas State had won bowl eligibility, and they were going so well, winning in that first quarter 10-7, and then within those second and third quarters, they really fell behind. But whenever I was looking at the stats, the thing that really popped out to me the most was the total yards. Keep in mind that Texas State's season average has been 464 yards per game. This game being only 280 yards versus Coastal Carolina's 347. Both pretty low ends for either team. So what do you guys think was the reason for the total yards for this game being just so low?
You know, you really look at this game, and in all honesty, Texas State looked like they got a little bit comfortable playing at home. It's never easy when you go off into the road and you go into an opponent's arena and, you try to kind of do what you do normally that you're playing at home. So you really look at it, TJ Finley had a really off game. You look at that 49 yards compared to Ethan Bosco, the quarterback for Coastal Carolina, who had 145 yards and 2 touchdowns. Definitely not a good look. You have to assume that the defense for Coastal Carolina kind of, nudged at Texas State and kind of made it very, very difficult for them throughout this game. And then, of course, you mentioned penalties. They had a lot of penalties, and ultimately, when you have 12 penalties, like summing up for over 100 yards, there's no way you're going to be able to get an easy win, especially when you're playing on the road.
Yeah, also Texas State was missing a large component, Joey Hobart. He's a very important player, and we've seen that in past games, especially with their when they won bowl eligibility. He has been a key player, and they were missing him this game. So I definitely do think that was also a reason maybe as to why they didn't. They had very few yards, right? They didn't have I don't know. I feel like they were in a rhythm, like you were saying, and I think them missing that piece also kind of added to why there weren't that many yards, also to the loss. I just think it also comfortability with the game and not having those players that helped them win big like they did last week as well.
Yeah, you were mentioning Joey Hobart, who has really been the king of receiving that ball from passes from TJ Finley, and with his absence, I guess the team was like, well, maybe this will not be our passing game. So then they focused more on trying to rush it, and those rushing attempts just weren't quite as successful. Texas State's more known as a passing team, and so whenever you completely switch the fundamentals of what you've been doing this entire season to a whole different ball game, then it just didn't quite work out for Texas State. As you mentioned, penalties 12 for 122 compared to 3 for 24 for Coastal Carolina. That's a big difference. I don't think we've ever seen that many penalties for Texas State before, and that is just such a fundamental factor of this. And just looking to the numbers, TJ Finley with only 49 yards passing. I don't think I've ever seen nearly that. Typically the minimum is 100 or maybe 80 for a losing game, but no, this was 49, less than half of that. And then Ethan Basco for Coastal Carolina with 145, so basically tripling that and also having 2 touchdowns. And then we have rushing. Ismail Mahdi, who has been the Texas State rusher. He's been known to just get that ball, get those yards. He got 97 yards, which is great, but whenever you're lacking those passing yards, 97 just wasn't enough to compete for this game. And just a shout out to him having over 1,000 yards this season with 1,050, so 1,050 total rushing yards this season. Very impressive. There hasn't been that many seasons in history where a rusher has been able to get over 1,000 rushing yards in a season. Very impressive. But compared to Reese White with 41 yards for Coastal Carolina. So Coastal Carolina focused more on their passing. They didn't quite focus on their rushing, and because of that, they were able to get really that upper hand, and Texas State just wasn't able to defend against that. And then there also might be just like the morale, psychological element of, hey, they had just gotten bowl eligibility for the first time since 2014, and they're like, well, we basically already succeeded this season. Maybe they're kind of like laying it back, and they're like, hey, let's focus our efforts, save our energy for this big game. But and the reality of it is, if they're not able to get these wins now, then what makes them say that they're going to be able to get those wins during like the tournament for the bowl for getting those bowls? And so right now, these games are determining what bowl they're going to go into. So these games still matter. And though Texas State has been able to get bowl eligibility, it doesn't mean that they should be letting up their energy and just giving away wins that should have gone either way. Coastal Carolina, by no means being a bad team, they're a really great team. They're right now 7-3 compared to Texas State being 6-4. So they're by no means was this supposed to be an absolute destroy. But still, the Texas State, I believe, had a chance going into this game, and they really fumbled that after that first quarter, with them scoring no points in the second or third quarter. Quarter, and then coming back for 13 points in the fourth quarter, but it just wasn't quite enough to come back after that just massive trailing that they were doing. And yeah, and I also wanted to mention that there were no fumbles lost or interceptions thrown in this game, which is very unusual. Though there were so many penalties, having no fumbles there were fumbles, but there were no fumbles lost. And no interceptions thrown. That's been very unusual for not only Texas State, but also for Coastal Carolina. So that was a big factor in that. But what do you guys think? Do you have anything else to add on to that?
Yeah, I think you made some really good points. And, you mentioned Ismail Ahmadi, his rushing efforts. As great as Ismail Ahmadi is, I think it's going to be very difficult if you're just going to throw all of the weight on his shoulders and try to expect him to kind of, carry the team up and down the field every single time. Like, you look at TJ Finley, he really only threw 6 of 11 attempts, which is very unlikely. You think of TJ Finley and he has the ball in his hands every single time you're looking at him, and he's making dots, up and down the field. And I think what Monserrat said, it's a very good point that he's missing Joey Hobart. Joey Hobart is clearly his favorite receiver for the course of the entire season, and now you kind of take him out in a really big game against a really, really tough opponent. I think we knew coming into this game, and Texas State knew coming into this game, that it was not going to be easy. And I mean, the defense for Coastal Carolina was going to make things very difficult. But man, I did not think it was going to be this lopsided in terms of the passing yards and then the rushing yards. So I think you made a really good point. And honestly, I think Malik Hornsby needs to get a little bit more looks. I mean, you look at Malik Hornsby, they kind of throw him in really odd and really random situations, and he goes out there and he kind of will convert, on 3rd and long, or he'll convert on 3rd and short, and he uses his legs really well. And I think Malik Hornsby needs especially when TJ Finley is having a sort of off game, a sort of uncharacteristic game for him. I think Malik Hornsby is going to be that guy you can kind of throw in there and kind of help take the load off of TJ Finley's shoulders, because Malik Hornsby in himself, although he's a second-string quarterback, he's also very talented. And you look, he had a 50% on his passing attempts. He threw 4 for 8, so not many looks out there on the field, but he had 32 yards in the passing game. And you look at TJ Finley, he threw 6 of 11 and had 49. So I think, GJ Kinney is probably going to have to do a better job in terms of trying to mesh both of these quarterbacks together, because they're clearly both talented, and I think Malik Hornsby has a chance to be a first-string QB if it wasn't for TJ Finley.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were saying earlier, right? Now's the time to, I guess, figure out, not just using those key players, but also figuring out what players on your roster will help you, especially now going into now that you're bowl eligible and now that you have an opportunity, right? It's the first time since 2014 that you're being able to go into these games, start thinking about your full roster and start thinking about what if right, TJ Finley does get injured, right? Like, how is that going to look like? How are we going to, like, I guess, adapt and use all of these players that we have? And we have good players. Like you were saying, like, Malik Hornsberry he really showed out this game. And I think now is the time to be like, okay, how are we going to use the roster that we have, even in any situation, to, like, achieve our goal, right, at the end of the day? So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to mention, GJ Kinney just said, quoted, it was just one of those things where it just wasn't our night. And I feel like there was a lot of things that just went wrong, and I don't think that the Texas State football team should really be put too down for this loss. I think they still need to pick themselves back up and bring it into the next game. And with that, their next game will be Texas State versus Arkansas. Just to go into some history, Arkansas right now is 5-5, so 5 wins, 5 losses. So this definitely should be a game that Texas State should have a leg over them, and I think this could be a really great game. That game will be November 18th at 2 p.m. It is an away game. We had Texas State had 3 home games in a row, so it's nice to maybe go back to this a little bit and have some away games so that we can really bump up that audience numbers again. Because once you have 3 games in a row, then you have like 3 big games in a row. You go against Troy, and then you go against GA Southern. There's just big games, a lot of things going on. So it's nice to have a little bit of a break from all that. And just another thing is that Troy beat Louisiana Monroe, who was also very tied for first place going into this. And so that means that there will be no winning for Sunbelt for Texas State, unfortunately. If Troy had lost to Louisiana Monroe and then Texas State beat Louisiana Monroe, then there could have been a slight opportunity there. But with Troy beating Louisiana Monroe, those hopes have been unfortunately put to rest. But with that, let's get on to the next sport. All right, here we go. Men's basketball. Well, we have 2 games that we're going to be talking about. The first one being Texas State versus Miami. This was November 11th in an away game. Texas State right now for the men's basketball being 1-1 versus Miami was 0-2, and the final score being 75-65 win for Texas State, being a very close game. And now this was the first win for the Texas State men's basketball, and it was a close one too. And unfortunately, that first game a week prior had been an unfortunate loss. It was still a final close game, but it was very devastating. Whenever you're going into that spring season, you have high hopes and you lose your first game. That can really bring down your morale. But going into the second game, men's basketball came in with that W, with that victory, and I think that really brought up their spirits. And star players being Tyrell Morgan with 19 points, going 3 for 3 3-pointers, which was half the team's 3-pointers, absolutely killing it. Caden Gums being 14 points, and then Brandon Love with 13 points. Texas State went off strong in that first half, being 40-31. So whenever you have that first half ending, you're in that 9-point lead. You're ready to continue spiraling that, let that snowball just keep on going to get that W at the very end. So what do you guys think about that game? How do you think it turned out, and what do you think some of those star players that we're still trying to get a grasp of what star players are going to be for the Texas State basketball team, as we have a lot of newbies, and not quite as many returners. So what do you guys think about that?
You know, I think it's a very important win. Of course, they get their first win of the season, especially after that tough loss they had in the very first game of the season. So, you know, it was a pretty good team win. You think of it, they had 4 players scoring double-figure points. And you look at Tyrell Morgan, man, not only did he have 19 points, he also had 8 rebounds to go along with that. And you mentioned, you know, the ability to shoot from long range is going to be very important for this team. And I think it's a good point that you mentioned where, you know, it's a lot of new players that are also at the same time learning how to play with each other. I'm sure a lot of these players are used to having the ball in their hands and are used to being effective with the ball in their hands. But now all of a sudden you're kind of looking at it like, there's a lot of talented players, and they just have never played really or despite, you know, the off-season workouts and stuff like that, they haven't really gotten a chance to really see each other on the court at the same time. And so I feel like there is going to be sort of like this learning curve for this team where you're going to have to kind of realize who's going to be working well with each other and throwing these people in positions to score, throwing these people in positions to be better defenders, and really, you know, you look at this team and it's going to be an up and down season. Like, that's the only thing you can really imagine is how they're going to finish it out, because I mean early on you can tell they're going to be struggling, with certain games. Like certain games they're going to have to figure out ways to win and figure out ways to score with all of these, guys that are still learning to play with each other. So
Yeah. Well, while having like star players is great and all, if you don't have the team dynamics, then it just all falls apart. You can't just rely on one or two people, and it just takes time. It is really just going to take time. They have a bunch of games ahead of them in the spring season, and hopefully within these next couple of games that they kind of figure it out, find that key in the lock, and are able to find what works out, what do we need to do to really get those points going. And leading into that second game, Texas State versus Oklahoma, and just keep in mind Oklahoma is just in history has been a really, really good team. They're right now 3-0 for this season, while Texas State 1-2 after this game, with the final scoring being 54-93 loss. Now that's a loss that you really don't want to see for your school. And that first half being 22-45. Whenever you're trailing by 23 points, I can only imagine that really hits hard. And then it's like, well, what do we have left for this game? And so that's a really, really hits hard in the morale. But even though there was that, I think we still had some players that performed really well, with Dylan Dawson with 13 points and 3 3-pointers, Joshua Garo with 10 points, and then Caden Gums with 9 points. So it's still very impressive stats for the team, even though they went up against a very tough opponent. I think that they overall did pretty good with what they had, with what the team is, and sometimes you just have to get those losses in the beginning if you really want to get those wins later on. So what do you guys think about that game?
You look at that Oklahoma Sooners game, and I mean, you think of the Oklahoma Sooners, and they're just such a dominant program. I mean, even in their own conference, right? So I think going into this game, nobody had Texas State taking a W over Oklahoma, although they would have really liked to enjoy a nice victory on the road. Oklahoma's a very tough team. They're very physical. They have length. They have size. They have, a really solid point guard there, and like you had mentioned, a 20-point game at the half, it's going to be really tough to even overcome that after you've gone down 20 points and you go into the locker room at halftime. This Oklahoma team, they were just better. I mean, you got to give their hats off to them. They were just a better team. They're just a better program. And this Texas State team is obviously very young. They're obviously still working to learning to play with each other. So I don't think anybody really had Texas State taking this W here. You could look at it like it is a tough loss, but there's going to be many tough losses over the course of the season. You think later this month on November 30th, Texas State's going to have to play UT. They're going to have to play the University of Texas. And I think, a lot of people are definitely not looking at Texas State like they're going to go in there and upset them. But at the end of the day, for the team, they can't really have that mindset. They have to make sure that they believe they can win every single game. And although they may have, 40-point losses, 30-point losses, you can't really let that get under your skin. You can't really let that drag you down and pull you into the water, because then all of a sudden you're kind of looking at the season, and then you're just going to kind of lose confidence, with these games. So I think it's going to be important for Texas State men's basketball to bounce back, especially today. You look, they're going to have a rival game against UTSA. So I think for Texas State, it's just going to be one of those games you kind of got to brush under the rug, understand that it was a tough loss and just keep it moving.
Yeah, and especially with a new and a fresh team, right? Defense matters. In these games, especially with these good teams, we can do as much as we can offensively, but also defensively, that's where you're going to start seeing a difference, right? Playing hard defense, a little bit more pressure, I guess, on these better teams can lead to these better teams also feeling a need to rush whenever they are playing offensively. So maybe even seeing that in these next few games, right? How can we pressure defensively as a fresh team to start seeing some change in the offense as well, because we did have only 18 defensive rebounds compared to OU's 30 defensive rebounds. So just even seeing how can we just perform a little bit better defensively as well, to just see a change.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great point. And with that, their next game will be Texas State versus UTSA, our I-35 rivals, and so this will be a home game, and so this will be Friday on September 17th, which is today at 7:15 p.m. So make sure to show up. That's going to be a big game. Both teams are I would say pretty similar on skill level, so I think this is really anyone's game going into this. So make sure to get as much attendance for this or audience. We need to get as much the biggest audience there as possible. And this is their first home game for the spring season, so let's show support. And with that, we're going to go into our next game. This is going to be women's basketball, Texas State versus Bowling Green. This was November 11th also, this being in a home game at Strahan Coliseum. The final score being 74-48. Texas State win. And that right there is a win that Texas State has been really showing. Just looking at the Texas State women's basketball team, they've been having and I know this is very early in the season so far, but they've been having some really high-scoring games going into this and absolutely dominating their opponents with just players overall. And something I noticed while this Texas State team has some really high-scoring players, it overall just isn't one player. What players do you think on their team has really some potential to really being a star player? And I think this game really showed that. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely, a lot of these games have been team victories. There's a lot of players that are just kind of producing for this Texas State women's basketball team. But honestly, one person that really opened my eyes, and surprisingly enough, is going to be typically the smallest player in the court, is Janiah Henson, who had 18 points on 5 of 8 field goal attempts. And, she even made a really incredible half-court shot there at the end of the third quarter, and that was very impressive. But, Janiah Henson, man, she really knows how to get that ball in the basket. And being at that point guard position, she's able to kind of run the offense and kind of utilize the tools that she has around her to kind of get a better scoring game for them as well. In this game, also had 4 players in double figures, so it's not just Janiah Henson. You're defensively, you're thinking of Jalen Foster, who's a very, very great defensive player. She had multiple charges in this Bowling Green game. I think almost every time down, they would attack the court, and Jalen Foster was in perfect position to grab a charge. And so things like that kind of help boost your team and help boost your confidence. And ultimately, it kind of topples over to the offensive side of the ball, where you can kind of be successful and be able to get more possessions for your team. So I think overall, both defensively and offensively, this team has really good graduate players on the team that can really help, and you can tell they're just learning to play with each other, and they're learning very fast.
Yeah, just keep in mind, I remember mentioning this last week, but the team has 8 newcomers and 4 returners, so that's a big ratio right there of just, there's a lot of people that are new to this, and not necessarily new to the sport, but are new to this Texas State team. And so whenever you have that, you can have a lot of star players, but if the things just don't click and the team doesn't work well together, then it struggles. But within these first few games, the team has just been absolutely killing it. Their teamwork is on another level, and that's really promising going into the rest of the spring season, and that's just been really great. And for Bobcats, this game had a 10+ points, just really showing that's a good rounded team with not having reliance on just one singular or 2 people. So, and with that, their next game will be Texas State versus UTR-GV. This will be November 17th, Friday at 5 p.m. So this will be right before the men's basketball game, and it will be a home game at Strahan Coliseum. So with that, let's get into our final sport. The final sport being volleyball. And keep in mind, this was senior night, Texas State versus Coastal Carolina, November 10th, and was a home game. And just to recap over what happened last week, it was a loss against Coastal Carolina for their first game of the 2, and it was a 1-3 loss. But going into this game, the final score was a 3-1 set win for Texas State, and that's really big. Texas State being 19-8 and 12-4 for the conference, just really doing great. And even though it was a 3-1, it was still a close game. Just looking at these set scores, the third set being 24-26, and the final set being 29-27. Just really going in those overtime points. So that was a very intense game, and it really could have gone either way. But Texas State, even though they lost that first game the day prior, they were really able to show up. And with this game, that ended the Sun Belt Conference play, and they're going to be moving on to the tournament. Just a few stats. KJ Johnson absolutely killing it with 15 kills. Bailey Hanner with 5 blocks. And it was also senior night for KJ Johnson, Sophia Childs, and Megan Woods, who are going to be graduating. So that's very important for them. And with that, we finally get to go into the tournament for Texas State women's volleyball, and this is going to be a very exciting Sun Belt tournament. Their first game is going to be November 17th at 7 p.m. an away game in Alabama, and they are ranked number 1 for this first seed in in the West Division. So, as a reminder, the Coastal Carolina was number 1 East Division, so Texas State is number 1 in the West Division. And their first game will be Texas State versus Marshall. And now we haven't really seen a whole lot of Texas State going against Marshall. They're pretty new to the Sun Belt Conference, so there's not a lot of stats to really go off in history, so this could be really anyone's game. And there's also the Sun Belt Awards, and those were just announced this last week, with Texas State sophomore Jay DeFrey being named Defensive Player of the Year in the Sun Belt Conference, 6 nationally for the Texas State team, and 83 blocks in the Sun Belt Conference total play. And then Texas State grad transfer from Fairfield, KJ Johnson, named the Sun Belt Newcomer of the Year with 173 kills during conference play. And there was also we had 5 players make the first and second team. What players, Kobe, made the first and second team?
Yeah, all conference selections, for the first team was Samantha Wunsch. Definitely a great, talented player down low in the middle blocking area. And also the second team had 4 Texas State Bobcats with Alyssa Ortega, Ryan Torres, KJ Johnson, and Jay DeFrey, all making the all Sun Belt second team selection, which is very impressive, especially for this Texas State team to have 5 players making these selections, these awards.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see volleyball has had such a good season, and going into tournament play, I'm really excited to see how they do. But I do KJ Johnson has been such an asset to the team, as a grad student that came in and I don't know, just really showed out this season and was a leader and a mentor for a lot of these players. I don't know, seeing her play during tournament is going to be excited. I mean, she has great stats, like you said, she had her 10th double-double this season in this game with 15 kills and 15 digs. So just seeing that energy continue, especially with her, is going to be super exciting, especially with her last season as well.
Yeah, and KJ Johnson over the course of the season was kind of, riddled with injuries here and there. So it has not been an easy road or easy journey for KJ Johnson. But at the end of the day, you really look at it and she's still being productive and she's still leading this Bobcat squad to a semifinals appearance, as they with the Western Division championship, they do get 2 byes in the Sun Belt Conference tournament. So obviously they've had time to rest, they've had time to kind of scout their opponent and see who they're going to play, and they end up playing Marshall. And like you said, not much history, but I think Marshall is going to come in and they're going to really attack Texas State. Texas State is going to have to be wary about Marshall and making sure that they don't get too comfortable within the Sun Belt Conference tournament. And for KJ Johnson, what better way to finish off her collegiate career than to win a Sun Belt Conference championship with her first year at Texas State? The way she played, really the way the whole team played in that Coastal Carolina game, it was like they just needed a comeback. They needed revenge from that original loss to Coastal Carolina. And you mentioned that 3-1 victory. The stats kind of do lie in this one because it was a very, very close competitive game, but Texas State was still able to kind of pull through and bring it home that victory. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this Sun Belt Conference tournament is going to play out, given that Texas State has been to the Sun Belt Championship 5 times in the past 5 years. So, they'll be looking for their 6th and ultimately their 3rd championship as well this season. So it'll be very interesting, and I'm very excited to see how things are going to play out.
And with that being said, we're going to do a quick recap of the games that are going to be coming up with this week. We have the women's basketball game versus UTRGV, 5 p.m., home game at the Strahan Coliseum. Right after that game at 7:15, and keep note that if the women's game goes a little bit longer, then it will take place 30 minutes after the women's game ends. This will be the men's basketball game versus UTSA, 7:15 p.m. Make sure to show up for that home game at Strahan Coliseum. After that, we have the Texas State Volleyball versus Marshall and the Sun Belt Conference, November 17th, 7 p.m., away game in Alabama. Then we have the Texas State versus Arkansas, November 18th, away game once again. So with that, and I also wanted to quickly mention, with the fall intramurals are now coming to a close, keep in mind, because we still have spring intramurals coming up. My favorite personally being outdoor soccer, but there's so many different opportunities that you can really be a part of. So start looking into that. Those signups are going to be starting up soon, and we'll be really going on for an amazing spring intramural season for Texas State. And with that being said, thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Weekly Bobcat Breakdown. As I wrap up, remember to subscribe to the Bobcat Bulletin YouTube channel so that you can stay updated on all things Texas State athletics. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week.